Sarah Mitchell, a poised and confident black woman in her early 30s, drove into the corporate parking lot of Redwood Industries. She had spent years building her career, climbing the ladder through resilience, intelligence, and sheer hard work. Today, she was interviewing for a senior executive role that could open new doors and solidify her position in the corporate world. Sarah knew the weight of this opportunity and had prepared meticulously, honing her presentation and studying the company's values and recent projects. Her demeanor was calm but focused, embodying professionalism with every step. Unlike the typical candidates arriving in luxury cars, Sarah drove a modest but reliable sedan. It wasn't flashy, but it was hers, a symbol of her journey, built on substance rather than superficial show. She parked her car in a spot near the entrance, not realizing that this particular spot was unofficially reserved by Tom Jenkins, a middle manager in the company. Tom, a white man in his mid-40s, had been with Redwood Industries for over a decade. While his role held no official power over parking spaces, he had developed a proprietary sense of ownership over this particular spot, taking it as a mark of his tenure. Tom Jenkins had a reputation among employees as someone whose friendly smile often masked an underlying arrogance and prejudice. He was known to treat certain employees with a casual condescension that he disguised as light-hearted humor, though many in the company, especially women and minorities, felt the sting of his words and actions. Tom had never had to confront the biases he carried. No one had ever called him out directly, and he took this as proof that his views were valid. To him, people like Sarah were outsiders, not meant for the spaces he considered his own. He believed, on some level, that they hadn't earned their place in the corporate world. Sarah walked towards the building with quiet determination, unaware of Tom's simmering indignation as he watched her from the far end of the parking lot. He observed her attire, a neatly tailored suit, a smart bag slung over her shoulder, and dismissed her as someone who was trying too hard to look professional. In his mind, Sarah was the type of person who didn't belong here. He felt that her presence, her demeanor, and especially her confidence challenged the unspoken order he'd grown comfortable with. The notion that Sarah might be interviewing for a high-ranking position, possibly even above his own, only fueled Tom's resentment. He felt an urge to put her in her place, to remind her that she was stepping into territory she didn't fully understand. A small, petty voice in his head whispered that it was his responsibility to ensure that people like her knew their boundaries. It was irrational, and he knew it, but his annoyance with her was real and immediate. As Sarah disappeared through the glass doors of the building, Tom paced in frustration. An idea began to form in his mind, one that seemed harmless to him yet filled with an oddly satisfying sense of retribution. He knew that there were a few bags of trash collected from the night before left near the foreseer the loading dock. Without giving it much thought, he walked briskly over, grabbed a couple of bags, and carried them back to where Sarah had parked. Looking around to make sure no one was watching, he tore open the bags and began dumping the contents over Sarah's car. He scattered coffee cups, food wrappers, and office debris across her hood and windshield, feeling a childish satisfaction as he watched the trash cover her vehicle. Tom stepped back and admired his work, feeling that he had sent a message without saying a word. The garbage covering Sarah's car was, to him, a declaration that she didn't belong here, that her confidence and composure didn't intimidate him. His petty vandalism wasn't about Sarah personally. It was a manifestation of his disdain for anyone he felt encroached on his territory. He walked back to his own office with a smug smile, unaware that this impulsive action would set off a chain of events that would turn his world upside down. Inside the building, Sarah's interview was already underway. She met with several members of the executive team, discussing her vision, experience, and potential contributions to Redwood Industries. The panel was impressed. Her insight into the company's current challenges and her ideas for driving growth were exactly what they were looking for. Sarah articulated her points with confidence, showing not only her understanding of the market, but also a sensitivity to corporate culture that the other candidates had lacked. What Sarah didn't know was that this interview was a pivotal moment for the company as well. Redwood Industries was at a turning point, with growing public scrutiny around corporate responsibility and inclusivity. The board was eager to bring in fresh talent who could offer a perspective aligned with modern values, someone who could elevate their brand reputation. Sarah's profile fit this vision perfectly, not just because of her professional acumen, but also because of her deep commitment to creating inclusive and fair workplaces. As Sarah continued to make a positive impression in the interview, Tom was busy in his office, enjoying a rare moment of self-satisfaction. He dismissed the nagging voice in his head that hinted he might have gone too far, choosing instead to relish the small act of defiance he had carried out. In his mind, he had defended his domain, asserting himself as a silent guardian of the company's unspoken culture. Back in the conference room, the interview panel was wrapping up with Sarah. They exchanged final thoughts, complimenting her on her vision and professionalism. One of the executives even hinted that she was a top contender for the position, a prospect that thrilled her. As she thanked them and left the room, she felt a surge of optimism about her future at Redwood Industries. The opportunity seemed within reach, and she allowed herself a moment of quiet excitement. But as Sarah exited the building and made her way back to her car, her optimism turned to shock. There, in the bright daylight, her car sat covered in trash. Coffee stains, food wrappers, and paper scraps blanketed her vehicle, a chaotic display of disrespect. Sarah froze for a moment, processing the sight before her. It wasn't the first time she'd faced hostility, but this felt different. It was targeted and calculated. It was a message. Taking a deep breath, Sarah approached her car, carefully moving some of the trash to get to her door. She realized this was more than a petty prank. It was a symbolic act meant to belittle her. But Sarah wasn't one to be intimidated easily. Instead of reacting impulsively, she straightened her shoulders and made a mental note. She would deal with this in her own way, professionally and decisively. Determined not to let this incident overshadow her accomplishments, Sarah drove to a nearby car wash to clean her vehicle. As she watched the trash rinse away, she began planning her next steps. She knew she had a choice: ignore the incident and let it slide, or address it head-on and expose the toxic behavior festering in Redwood Industries. For someone who had spent years advocating for respect and accountability, the choice was clear. This was no longer just about her car, or even her own pride. It was about the kind of workplace she was potentially stepping into. Sarah realized that if she joined this company, she would need to make some significant changes, starting with confronting the silent but powerful culture that allowed people like Tom to thrive unchecked. And with that resolve, Sarah set her course. As Sarah drove away from the car wash, her mind churned with a mix of emotions: anger, disbelief, and a simmering resolve. The image of her car buried under trash wasn't something she could easily shake off. She knew this wasn't a random act of vandalism. It was personal, a calculated attempt to demean her. But rather than letting it shake her confidence, Sarah decided to treat it as an opportunity to test the company's culture before even joining. If Redwood Industries truly valued the principles of professionalism, respect, and inclusivity they claimed, she would find out soon enough. The first thing she did was drive back to the Redwood Industries building. This time, she wasn't going in as a job candidate. She was here to make a point, and in her own subtle way, to put a spotlight on the toxic behavior that she suspected ran deeper than just one petty incident. As she walked into the building, she made her way straight to the Human Resources Department, her steps steady and purposeful. The HR office was busy, with several employees shuffling in and out, attending to various tasks. Sarah approached the front desk, where a young receptionist greeted her with a polite but distracted smile. She introduced herself, explaining that she was a candidate for an executive position and that there had been an incident involving her vehicle. The receptionist's expression shifted from polite indifference to curiosity and concern, and she quickly directed Sarah to an HR manager, a woman named Linda Walters. Linda was a seasoned professional in her 50s with a calm and no-nonsense demeanor. She looked up from her desk as Sarah entered, gesturing for her to take a seat. Sarah introduced herself again, explaining the events that had transpired in the parking lot. Linda's face remained neutral as she listened, her hands folded on the desk in front of her. When Sarah finished recounting the incident, Linda leaned forward slightly. "Miss Mitchell, first of all, let me apologize on behalf of Redwood Industries. This is certainly not the kind of welcome we intend to offer our candidates or employees. I assure you, this matter will be taken seriously." "Thank you, Linda," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "I believe in handling situations professionally, and I trust that Redwood will do the same. However, I must admit, this experience has given me some pause about the company culture here. As someone potentially stepping into a leadership role, it's important for me to understand the environment I'll be working in." Linda nodded, understanding the subtext. She was an experienced HR manager and knew that incidents like this could leave a lasting impression, especially on someone as perceptive as Sarah. "I completely understand, Ms. Mitchell. I'd like to propose a course of action. We'll conduct a discreet investigation to identify who might be responsible for this incident. And if you don't mind, I'd also like to ask you a few questions about your observations today. This can help us identify areas where we may need improvement." Sarah agreed, appreciating the professionalism with which Linda was handling the situation. They spent the next few minutes discussing Sarah's initial impressions of the company, and Sarah made it clear that her primary concern was creating a respectful and inclusive workplace environment. She didn't name names or point fingers, but her implication was clear: she wouldn't tolerate a culture where acts of intimidation and pettiness went unchallenged. Meanwhile, Tom Jenkins was in his office, blissfully unaware of the ripple effect his actions had set in motion. He was, in fact, feeling rather smug about the whole thing. In his mind, he had successfully put Sarah in her place. He felt that she would either be humiliated enough to withdraw her candidacy, or at least think twice before assuming she could stride confidently into his company. Tom couldn't imagine that Sarah would dare to take this incident further after all. He had always gotten away with his subtle, often disguised acts of discrimination and petty power plays. Why would this be any different? Linda, however, was thorough. She arranged for security to review the footage from the parking lot cameras. Within hours, they had clear evidence of Tom carrying bags of trash to Sarah's car and dumping them all over it. As the security team relayed this information back to Linda, she felt a wave of disappointment wash over her. Tom Jenkins had been with Redwood Industries for years, but it was clear he had a deeply entrenched sense of entitlement that was incompatible with the values the company was trying to promote. Linda knew that this couldn't be swept under the rug. She set up a formal meeting with Tom, careful not to reveal too much over the phone. Tom, still oblivious to the gravity of the situation, entered the HR office with a casual confidence, assuming it was just a routine check-in. but when he saw the serious expression on Linda's face and the file open on her desk, a flicker of unease settled over him. "Tom, I'm going to be very direct with you," Linda began, her voice steady. "We have evidence that you vandalized the car of a candidate who was here for an interview today. The security footage shows you carrying bags of trash and dumping them on her vehicle. Can you explain this?" For a moment, Tom was stunned into silence. His initial instinct was to deny everything, but he quickly realized there was no point in lying with the evidence stacked against him. He stammered, searching for a way to downplay his actions. "It was just a joke," he said finally, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I thought it would be a little reminder for her to respect certain unspoken boundaries." Linda's gaze hardened. "Tom, do you realize how inappropriate that is? This isn't a prank or a joke. It's a targeted act meant to humiliate a potential employee, and it reflects poorly on Redwood Industries as a whole. This behavior is not just unprofessional, it's discriminatory." Tom shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his confidence draining away. He wasn't used to being confronted so directly, especially by someone in HR. "Linda, I didn't mean anything serious by it. You know how things are around here. I've been with the company for over a decade, and I didn't think." "That's exactly the problem, Tom," Linda interrupted. "You didn't think, and now we're facing a serious issue that affects our reputation and our ability to attract diverse talent. Redwood Industries is committed to fostering an inclusive environment, and your actions go against everything we stand for." Tom's face flushed, a mix of anger and humiliation. He was beginning to understand that this incident wasn't going to simply disappear. Linda's tone left no room for negotiation. He could see she meant every word. He realized, belatedly, that he had underestimated both Sarah and the company's commitment to changing its culture. Linda continued, her tone professional but firm. "Given the nature of your actions, I'm afraid we have no choice but to initiate disciplinary procedures. This will include a review of your overall conduct at Redwood Industries. If there have been other incidents or complaints from colleagues, they will be factored into our decision on how to proceed." Tom could feel the walls closing in. He wanted to argue, to protest, but he understood that any further resistance would only worsen his situation. He had always thought he could act with impunity, but now he was confronted with the reality that his actions had consequences. After her meeting with Linda, Sarah was informed of the situation's progress. Linda reached out to her personally to assure her that the incident was being handled with the utmost seriousness and that the company was committed to ensuring a respectful environment for all employees. Sarah appreciated the transparency and professionalism, feeling a renewed sense of confidence in her potential new workplace. As she listened to Linda outline the steps being taken, Sarah felt a sense of justice, knowing that the company was addressing the issue head-on rather than dismissing it as a trivial matter. This reaffirmed her desire to join Redwood Industries not just as an executive, but as a leader who could help cultivate an environment where respect, diversity, and integrity were upheld. In her mind, this incident had proven two things. First, that Redwood Industries was willing to confront its own issues, and second, that she was more than capable of effecting real change within the company. For Sarah, this wasn't just about a vandalized car anymore. It was a defining moment, a catalyst, that marked the beginning of a journey not only to secure her role within the company, but to leave a lasting impact on its culture. And with that, she resolved to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that Redwood Industries was already on a path of transformation. After her conversation with Linda in HR, Sarah left the Redwood Industries, feeling a surge of validation and confidence. She sensed that the company was taking her concerns seriously, and this initial step confirmed to her that perhaps she was joining an organization that was willing to root out toxicity, even if it meant confronting long-standing employees like Tom. However, Sarah knew that deep-rooted issues weren't resolved overnight, and one disciplined employee wouldn't necessarily change a culture. She was determined to do more than just secure a job. She wanted to help cultivate a workplace that truly valued respect and inclusivity. But as Sarah's candidacy moved forward, tension within the office began to grow. News of the incident with Tom and the mysterious vandalism on the company's parking lot spread among employees, albeit in hushed whispers and discreet exchanges. Rumors circulated, twisting the story in various directions. Some thought it was a prank gone wrong. Others suspected it was a targeted attack. Few knew the real details, but the uncertainty created a palpable unease within the team. Tom, who had managed to talk his way out of several tight spots in the past, initially assumed this incident would blow over like the others. Yet, as the days went by, he noticed an unusual level of scrutiny directed his way. Colleagues who once laughed at his offhand remarks now seemed distant and reserved, their conversations shifting whenever he walked by. Even his longtime friend and confidante in the company, Alex, began to keep his distance, sensing the mounting tension around Tom. This isolation chipped away at his usual bravado, leaving him uncomfortably exposed. Meanwhile, HR quietly initiated a more thorough investigation into Tom's behavior. Linda was methodical, interviewing employees who had interacted with Tom over the years, subtly inquiring if they'd ever experienced or witnessed any conduct that felt unprofessional or hostile. At first, the responses were cautious. Most employees didn't want to be seen as tattletales, nor did they want to jeopardize their own standing by criticizing a manager. But as Linda continued her inquiries, a pattern began to emerge. Several employees admitted that Tom's humor often crossed a line, especially when it came to race or gender. While he was careful not to make overtly offensive statements, his words often carried a condescending undertone, veiled enough to avoid direct complaints but impactful enough to create a sense of discomfort among those on the receiving end. Women and people of color seemed to be his primary targets, subtly reminded that they were different or outsiders. Linda took detailed notes, recognizing that these accumulated testimonies painted a troubling picture of a manager who operated with impunity, shielded by his years of service and a veneer of superficial charm. One afternoon, as Linda continued her quiet investigation, Sarah received a phone call from Linda's assistant, inviting her to return for a follow-up meeting regarding her application. The timing felt significant. Sarah knew this wasn't a standard interview, but rather a chance for the company to gauge her reaction to the escalating situation. Sarah prepared herself, determined to maintain a professional demeanor despite the lingering frustration from the vandalism incident. When she arrived at the HR office, Linda greeted her warmly, but with a tone that hinted at the gravity of the conversation to come. After a few formalities, Linda got straight to the point. "Sarah," Linda began, leaning forward with a sincere expression, "we've conducted an internal review following the incident with your vehicle. As you know, Redwood Industries strives to uphold a respectful and inclusive work environment. Part of our commitment involves addressing issues, even if they involve long-standing employees." Sarah nodded, maintaining eye contact, her expression composed. She sensed that Linda was preparing to share more about the company's findings. "We've discovered that Tom's actions weren't just an isolated incident," Linda continued. "Multiple employees have expressed discomfort with his behavior. While he's been with us for over a decade, It's become clear that his presence has had a negative impact on the team dynamic. To put it plainly, his behavior contradicts the values we're trying to foster here. This confirmation filled Sarah with a mix of vindication and determination. She understood that this was her opportunity to advocate for broader changes within the company, a chance to turn her individual experience into a catalyst for improving the entire workplace culture. "Thank you for sharing this with me, Linda," Sarah replied thoughtfully. "I believe Redwood has a tremendous potential to be a leader in fostering diversity and respect. If I'm fortunate enough to join the team, I'd love to contribute to creating policies that can prevent this kind of behavior in the future." Linda's face softened, clearly impressed by Sarah's composed response. "I think you'd be exactly the kind of leader we need, Sarah. In fact, I wanted to discuss a few initiatives with you, ways we can address not only Tom's behavior, but also ensure that similar issues don't arise in the future." Linda then outlined a plan she had been considering, a set of workshops and open discussions that would allow employees to address concerns without fear of retaliation. Sarah listened intently, nodding along, and added a few of her own ideas, suggesting an anonymous feedback system where employees could report misconduct without feeling exposed. As the meeting continued, Sarah's role in this transformation became increasingly clear. Linda viewed her not only as a potential executive, but also as a catalyst for reshaping Redwood Industries' culture. This was more than a job offer, it was an invitation to lead a change that had been long overdue. By the time the meeting concluded, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. She realized that this was her chance not only to join the company but to leave a lasting impact. The vandalism incident was no longer just a personal slight, it was a symbol of the very challenges Redwood needed to overcome. And Sarah was ready to take on that challenge head-on. Meanwhile, word of Sarah's involvement in the HR investigation began to spread, albeit in a subtle, almost whispered manner. Tom caught wind of it through fragments of conversations he overheard in the break room and passing glances exchanged by his colleagues. Anxiety began to settle in his chest, tightening with each new piece of gossip that reached his ears. The image he had carefully cultivated over the years of a seasoned manager respected by his peers was beginning to crack. In a desperate attempt to regain control of the situation, Tom arranged an informal meeting with a few of his colleagues after hours, hoping to rally support. He painted himself as the victim of an overblown misunderstanding, framing the incident with Sarah as a harmless joke that had been blown out of proportion by corporate politics. He complained about the hypersensitivity infecting the company culture, appealing to his co-workers' sense of nostalgia for the old Redwood, where people could take a joke. But his attempt to manipulate the narrative fell flat. The employees, once receptive to his humor and charisma, now viewed him with wary eyes. Many of them had privately admitted to themselves, and later to HR, that Tom's so-called jokes had made them uncomfortable for years. His once loyal audience was no longer on his side, and the few nods he received were half-hearted at best. As the group disbanded, Tom realized that he was truly alone in this fight. He felt the weight of his isolation, knowing that his career at Redwood was hanging by a thread. The next morning, Tom was summoned to HR for a formal disciplinary meeting. As he walked down the corridor toward Linda's office, he felt the eyes of his colleagues on him, their gazes a mixture of pity, judgment, and perhaps a hint of satisfaction. For years he had been untouchable, navigating Redwood's politics with ease and brushing off complaints as mere misunderstandings. But now, those same colleagues seemed almost relieved to see him finally facing consequences. Inside Linda's office, Tom's sense of confidence wavered as he took his seat. Linda's face was unreadable, professional yet firm. She opened the meeting by outlining the findings of the investigation, detailing how his behavior had created a hostile environment for multiple employees over the years. She listed incidents, some of which Tom barely remembered, each one a reminder of how far-reaching his actions had been. "You've been a valued member of Redwood for many years, Tom," Linda said, her tone controlled but unyielding. "But it's clear that your conduct has repeatedly crossed the line. The complaints against you are serious, and they reflect a pattern of behavior that Redwood Industries cannot condone." Tom attempted to defend himself, his voice strained and defensive. "Look, Linda, I know I might have joked around a bit too much, but I never meant any harm. I've been here for a decade. I've seen Redwood through its ups and downs. This is all a huge misunderstanding." Linda shook her head. "It's not about intentions, Tom. It's about impact. Your words and actions have created an environment where employees feel uncomfortable and undervalued. This goes against everything we stand for. We're making changes here, and unfortunately, that means there's no place for behavior like yours." Tom fell silent, the reality of his situation settling heavily on him. He had built his career on the assumption that he was untouchable, that his tenure and connections would shield him from accountability. But now he was watching that foundation crumble. Linda continued, her words final and resolute. "Effective immediately, your position with Redwood Industries will be terminated. You'll have the support of our transition team, but we cannot keep you here under these circumstances." The words hit Tom like a blow. Termination. He had imagined warnings, maybe even a temporary suspension, but never this. His face flushed, and he opened his mouth to protest, but the look in Linda's eyes told him there was no room for negotiation. This was the end of his tenure at Redwood. Outside Linda's office, Sarah happened to be walking by when she saw Tom exiting, his expression a mix of shock, anger, and disbelief. Their eyes met briefly, and she could see the resentment boiling beneath his forced composure. But Sarah remained calm, her gaze steady and unyielding. She had come to Redwood to make a difference, and she was seeing the impact of her influence already. As Tom walked out of the building, the employees who had once been his allies watched in silence. The rumors, the unspoken resentments, and the years of discomfort had culminated in this moment. For Redwood Industries, it was the beginning of a new chapter, a chance to redefine its values and align its culture with a modern, inclusive vision. And for Sarah, it was the first step in what she hoped would be a long and meaningful journey as a leader dedicated to positive change. After Tom's departure, Redwood Industries felt a palpable shift in its atmosphere. The company's decision to terminate a long-standing manager due to inappropriate behavior sent a strong message across the organization. Redwood was serious about redefining its culture. Employees began to sense that things were changing, and for the first time, many felt safe enough to openly discuss their experiences and concerns with each other. For Sarah, however, Tom's dismissal was only the beginning. The incident with the vandalized car had catalyzed her resolve to take this position and lead a deeper transformation within the company. She hadn't come to Redwood just to climb the corporate ladder. She was here to build something meaningful, a place where professionalism and inclusivity thrived side by side. The challenge before her was monumental, and she knew that her journey was just beginning. Soon after Tom's departure, Sarah received an official offer letter for their executive role. She accepted it, understanding that her first task was not just to lead her team, but to cultivate a new standard of behavior throughout Redwood. Linda from HR, seeing Sarah's potential as a changemaker, became one of her strongest allies, encouraging her to implement programs and policies that would reinforce the company's new direction. During her first week in the role, Sarah noticed that many employees were still uneasy, unsure if the company's promises of a new culture were anything more than temporary changes. There was still an undercurrent of doubt, a lingering fear that Redwood's commitment to a respectful workplace would fade with time. Sensing this apprehension, Sarah decided it was crucial to address these concerns head-on and make her stance as a leader clear. She arranged a series of team meetings across departments, framing them as opportunities for open dialogue and feedback. Sarah wanted to hear firsthand from the employees, to understand their experiences and concerns without any filters. At first, her team was hesitant. They were unaccustomed to such transparency from a senior executive. However, Sarah's approachable demeanor and genuine interest quickly began to break down their reservations. One of the first meetings took place in a spacious conference room with a view of the city skyline. Employees filed in slowly, each bringing with them a mix of curiosity and wariness. Sarah stood by the door, greeting each person warmly, acknowledging them by name where she could, and inviting them to grab a seat. Her welcoming approach helped ease some of the initial tension, and as the meeting began, the room gradually filled with a sense of cautious optimism. Sarah opened the meeting by recounting a bit of her own journey, carefully choosing words that reflected her commitment to integrity and respect. She acknowledged that she was new to Redwood, but shared her vision for a company where everyone felt valued and heard. Her speech was sincere, and employees felt that she was not merely saying what was expected, but genuinely believed in the mission she was setting out. After her introduction, Sarah paused, then looked around the room. "Now, I want to hear from you. Tell me what's working here at Redwood, and what isn't. No one will be judged for speaking up. I want this to be a safe space where we can discuss what we need to improve." At first, the silence was thick, and some employees exchanged nervous glances. Finally, a woman named Clara raised her hand, her voice tentative. "I think it's really inspiring to see a leader who actually wants to listen to us," she began, then hesitated before continuing. "But in the past, when we brought up issues with certain managers, nothing was done. People were afraid of retaliation, so they just stopped speaking up." Sarah nodded thoughtfully, her gaze steady. "Thank you for sharing that, Clara. I understand that trust has to be built over time. What happened with Tom was a signal that Redwood won't tolerate unprofessional behavior, no matter how long someone has been with the company. But that's only the first step. I'm committed to creating a structure where feedback isn't just heard but acted upon." Another employee, Jason, who had been with the company for nearly as long as Tom, cleared his throat. "With all due respect, Ms. Mitchell, I think people are worried that this is all just for show. We've seen changes come and go, and after a while it's back to the same old story." Sarah met his gaze, unfazed by the skepticism. "I understand your concern, Jason, and I don't expect you to take my word for it. This isn't about quick fixes or superficial changes. It's about building a foundation where respect and accountability are part of our daily operations. And that won't happen overnight. But I'm here to work with all of you to make sure these changes are real and lasting." The frankness in her tone resonated with the employees, and the discussion gradually became more open. People began sharing stories of times they had felt uncomfortable or ignored, small but impactful incidents that collectively contributed to an atmosphere of tension and fear. Sarah listened intently, taking notes and occasionally asking questions to delve deeper. She never interrupted or invalidated anyone's experience. Instead, she acknowledged their feelings, demonstrating that she was there to learn and understand. In the days following the initial meeting, Sarah worked closely with Linda and HR to formalize some of the ideas discussed. Together, they crafted a program they named Redwood Reset, designed to recalibrate the company's culture through structured feedback channels, anonymous reporting systems, and mandatory workshops on workplace respect and inclusivity. They announced the program at an all-hands meeting, with Sarah and Linda presenting the details together. Redwood Reset isn't just a program, Sarah told the gathered employees. It's a promise that we are committed to making this company a place where everyone feels respected and safe. This is a new beginning for Redwood, and I'm here to ensure that we live up to this promise. The program's launch generated a buzz across the company. Some employees were excited, while others remained skeptical, but there was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. People began to feel empowered, cautiously hopeful that perhaps this time things would truly change. One day, a few weeks into the Redwood Reset initiative, Sarah was working late in her office, reviewing feedback from recent sessions, when she received a message on her semi-sudden Clara, the woman who had spoken up during the initial team meeting. Clara requested a private conversation, saying she had something important to share. Sarah immediately invited Clara into her office, curious and concerned about what she had to say. Clara entered looking a bit nervous but resolute. After some brief small talk, Clara took a deep breath. "Sarah," she began, "there's something I didn't mention in the meeting. It's about Tom and others who were close to him. There's a pattern here. Tom may be gone, but the culture he influenced didn't disappear with him. There are still people here who think the same way he did, people who won't like what you're doing." Sarah leaned forward, her interest piqued. "Thank you for trusting me with this, Clara. I'm aware that real change takes time and that there may be resistance, but Redwood won't tolerate discriminatory or hostile behavior, regardless of who's involved. Do you feel comfortable sharing more?" Clara nodded, visibly relieved by Sarah's understanding. She went on to describe how Tom's clique had often used the Wafflins to undermine employees they didn't like or saw as a threat. They rarely did anything overtly wrong, but their behavior created an environment where certain people were marginalized and others were favored. Sarah listened carefully, aware that this information could be crucial in navigating the cultural transformation she was spearheading. Clara's insights validated something Sarah had suspected. Tom's toxic behavior was symptomatic of a broader issue within the company, a silent network of individuals who perpetuated the very culture Redwood was trying to leave behind. After Clara left, Sarah sat in silence, contemplating her next steps. She realized that Redwood Reset would need to dig deeper than surface-level policies. It would require a strategy to dismantle the underlying structures that allowed people like Tom to thrive. She made a mental note to work with HR on developing a mentorship and peer review system, a way to disrupt the power dynamics that had gone unchecked for years. Over the next few weeks, Sarah's dedication to Redwood Reset became the cornerstone of her leadership. She made a point to visit different departments regularly, fostering a sense of unity and openness. Slowly, employees began to feel more comfortable approaching her, sharing their experiences and insights. Sarah became more than just an executive. She was seen as a beacon of hope for those who had long felt overlooked. In time, the effects of Redwood Reset began to materialize. Employees who had once felt powerless started voicing their opinions confidently, and the anonymous reporting system empowered people to speak up without fear. Redwood's culture was changing, albeit gradually, and Sarah's influence was at the heart of it. But not everyone welcomed the change. A small group of employees, those who had once enjoyed the unspoken privileges of Tom's old Redwood, began to grumble, subtly undermining the Redwood Reset initiative whenever they could. They questioned the value of Sarah's policies in private, complaining about the new restrictions that came with the cultural overhaul. One evening, Sarah found an anonymous note left on her desk. The note read, "You're trying to change things that don't need fixing." Some of us liked Redwood the way it was. It was a reminder that her mission was not without opposition, that there were still forces within the company clinging to the old ways. But rather than discouraging her, the note strengthened Sarah's resolve. Sarah took it as a sign that she was on the right path, a path that would ultimately define Redwood Industries as a company committed to respect and integrity. The journey was far from over, and Sarah knew she had a battle ahead, but she was ready. With Redwood Reset gaining traction and employees beginning to embrace a culture of accountability, she felt more determined than ever to see this transformation through to the end. For Sarah, the midpoint of her journey at Redwood was not just about securing her position or proving herself as a leader. It was about creating a legacy, a workplace where respect, fairness, and inclusivity were more than just words on a company website. And with every small victory, she moved closer to making that vision a visuality. Months passed since the Redwood Reset initiative had begun, and Sarah's leadership continued to reshape the company's culture. Employees were beginning to embrace the new standards of accountability and respect, but the deeper Sarah delved into Redwood's inner workings, the more resistance she encountered. It was subtle at first, a quiet murmur in the break room, a dismissive remark overheard in the hallways, but it grew more pronounced over time. There was a faction within Redwood, small but vocal, that resisted Sarah's efforts to reform the company's ethos. These individuals were remnants of the old Redwood, those who had thrived under the former, more permissive culture, where Tom and others like him operated without constraint. One of the most prominent figures in this faction was Nathan Collier, a senior manager in Redwood's finance department. Nathan was a legacy employee, with family ties to the founders of the company, which gave him a sense of entitlement that Sarah found deeply troubling. He had long enjoyed a privileged status within Redwood, maneuvering through the corporate hierarchy with ease, using his connections to maintain his position. Nathan had been close to Tom, and he viewed Sarah's leadership and Redwood Reset as a personal affront, an attempt to undermine the values he held dear. In private, Nathan often spoke disparagingly about Sarah's initiatives, calling them overly political and unnecessary. He dismissed the Redwood Reset as a waste of resources, something he believed only weakened the company's focus on profit and productivity. Nathan wasn't alone in his views. He had a small circle of loyalists who shared his disdain for the changes Sarah was implementing. They were a relic of Redwood's past, clinging to the familiar ways of operating and unwilling to adapt to the new culture. Sarah was well aware of Nathan's discontent. She had heard rumors and had even received direct feedback from some employees who had overheard his comments. However, she believed in approaching the issue professionally, hoping to win Nathan and his allies over through dialogue rather than confrontation. She organized a meeting with Nathan, intending to discuss his concerns and address any misunderstandings about her vision for Redwood. The meeting took place in Sarah's office, a space she had carefully curated to be open and inviting, with large windows that overlooked the city skyline. Nathan entered with a guarded expression, his posture rigid as he took a seat across from Sarah. She could sense the tension in his body language, the restrained animosity simmering beneath his polite facade. "Thank you for meeting with me, Nathan," Sarah began, keeping her tone warm and professional. "I wanted to have an open conversation about Redwood Reset and hear any concerns you might have. I understand that change can be challenging, and I'd like to ensure that we're all aligned in our goals for the company." Nathan offered a thin smile, crossing his arms. "Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate the opportunity to share my thoughts. Frankly, I believe that Redwood was functioning well before these recent changes. I'm concerned that we're focusing too much on culture and inclusivity and not enough on what actually drives success, our bottom line. Sarah nodded, absorbing his words without interruption. I understand your point, Nathan. However, I believe that a healthy culture is essential for long-term success. When employees feel respected and valued, they're more engaged and productive, which ultimately benefits the company as a whole. Nathan's smile grew colder. Respect is important, of course, but some of us are wondering if this initiative is more about appearances than actual results. We're in a competitive market, and our focus should be on growth, not on trying to change what isn't broken. Sarah leaned forward, her gaze steady. Nathan, Redwood Reset isn't about appearances. It's about ensuring that everyone, regardless of their background or position, has the opportunity to thrive here. A company that respects and values all its employees will always be stronger and more resilient. I want Redwood to be a place where talent and hard work are the primary drivers of success, not outdated hierarchies or unspoken biases. Nathan's expression hardened, and Sarah sensed that her words had struck a nerve. I've been with Redwood for over 20 years, Sarah, he said, his voice tight with restrained emotion. I've seen people come and go, leaders with their own visions and ideas, all convinced they're making a difference. But in the end, Redwood has always stayed the same, and it's served us well. I don't see why we need to fix something that isn't broken. Sarah realized then that she was facing more than just resistance to her ideas. She was up against a deeply ingrained mindset, a sense of entitlement that was rooted in Redwood's past. Nathan and his allies viewed the company as their personal domain, a place where they could continue operating according to their own unspoken rules. They saw her as an intruder, an outsider who was disrupting the carefully crafted order they had maintained for decades. Nathan, Sarah said calmly, refusing to be intimidated, I respect your experience and your dedication to Redwood, but we're moving forward. The Redwood you knew may have served its purpose, but we're evolving, and that's not something we can compromise on. This isn't just my vision, it's the vision Redwood's leadership has embraced, and it's what we need to remain competitive in a changing world. Nathan's eyes narrowed, and for a moment his composure slipped. He realized that Sarah wasn't going to be swayed by his arguments, and his frustration was evident. He left the meeting with a curt nod, his resentment barely concealed. As he walked back to his office, he felt a surge of anger and a growing determination to undermine her efforts. In the days following their conversation, Sarah noticed subtle signs of Nathan's opposition. Reports and memos that were meant to be reviewed by her were misplaced, emails went unanswered, and certain departments began to show signs of resistance to the Redwood Reset protocols. It became clear that Nathan was leveraging his influence to sow discord among the employees who still respected his authority. He was undermining her leadership in the shadows, a silent act of rebellion that threatened to derail the progress she had made. Realizing that she couldn't allow this behavior to continue, Sarah sought counsel from Linda in HR. Together, they reviewed the feedback coming in from various departments, identifying patterns that pointed to Nathan's interference. Linda, who had become a trusted ally, was as resolute as Sarah in addressing these issues. She suggested a formal assessment of Redwood's management team, a comprehensive evaluation of how each manager contributed to the company's culture and values. The assessment, announced company-wide, was framed as part of Redwood Reset, an initiative to reinforce the values of professionalism and respect at every level of the organization. It was designed to hold all managers accountable, with each department undergoing evaluations based on feedback from employees. Managers were encouraged to reflect on their own practices, while employees were given a platform to voice their concerns and praise anonymously. Nathan's faction was not pleased with this development. They saw it as a direct attack on their influence, a tactic Sarah was using to weed out those who didn't align with her vision. Nathan, feeling cornered, escalated his campaign against her, spreading rumors that the assessments were a ploy to eliminate those who opposed Redwood reset. He whispered to his allies that this was an outsider's agenda, an attempt to erase Redwood's legacy and replace it with hollow corporate rhetoric. But Sarah remained undeterred. She continued to lead by example, maintaining transparency and engaging with employees at every level. Her open-door policy encouraged employees to speak freely, and the anonymous feedback system allowed people to report issues without fear of retribution. She was determined to create a space where integrity was valued over allegiance to any individual, no matter how long they'd been with the company. One day, during a Redwood Reset workshop, an employee approached Sarah privately after the session. His name was Daniel, a mid-level analyst who had been with Redwood for 5 years. Daniel looked around nervously before speaking, as if ensuring no one else could overhear. "Ms. Mitchell, I just wanted to thank you for what you're doing," he began, his voice low but earnest. "It means a lot to people like me. Before you came, I always felt invisible, like I was just another cog in the machine. But now, I feel like my voice actually matters." Sarah smiled, touched by his words. "Thank you, Daniel. That's exactly why we're doing this. Redwood should be a place where everyone feels valued, where everyone's contributions are recognized." Daniel nodded, then hesitated, as if struggling to find the right words. I don't know if I should say this, but there are still people here who don't feel the same way. People who think Redwood Reset is a waste of time. They're trying to make it hard for you." Sarah's expression softened, her understanding of the situation deepening. She could tell that Daniel was genuinely concerned, and his insight only confirmed what she had already suspected. "I appreciate your honesty, Daniel. I know change isn't easy, and there are always going to be people who resist. But I'm here to make sure Redwood becomes a place where respect is non-negotiable. I won't let anyone undermine that." Over the next few weeks, as the assessments were conducted and feedback poured in, a clear picture emerged. Nathan's department consistently showed signs of low morale and disengagement, with numerous complaints about his leadership style. Employees in his team reported feeling stifled and overlooked, with many expressing that their ideas were dismissed or undermined. The feedback painted a portrait of a leader who valued loyalty to himself over loyalty to the company's mission. Linda and Sarah reviewed the findings together, recognizing that they had enough evidence to confront Nathan directly. This time, however, Sarah decided to make it a formal review, an opportunity for Nathan to explain his conduct and for them to discuss the future of his role at Redwood. The review meeting took place in a conference room with Linda present as a witness. Nathan entered with his usual confidence, but Sarah could see a flicker of unease in his eyes. She began the meeting by outlining the feedback they had received, presenting him with a summary of the complaints from his team. "Nathan, it's clear that there are issues within your department that need to be addressed," Sarah said, her tone measured but firm. "The feedback suggests that your leadership style may be contributing to low morale and a lack of engagement among your team. This isn't aligned with Redwood's values, and it's something we need to discuss seriously." Nathan's face tightened, his composure slipping as he realized the gravity of the situation. He tried to defend himself, claiming that the feedback was biased, a result of employees who simply didn't understand how Redwood worked. He accused Sarah of orchestrating a witch hunt, targeting those who resisted Redwood reset as a way to consolidate her own power. But Sarah remained calm, refusing to be provoked by his accusations. "Nathan, this isn't about personal agendas. It's about Redwood's commitment to a respectful, inclusive environment. Your team deserves a leader who listens, who values their contributions, and who reflects the standards we're setting across the company." The conversation concluded with a clear ultimatum. Nathan would need to either align himself with Redwood's values or step down. His once unshakable confidence shattered. He left the room knowing that his influence within Redwood was fading. The power he had wielded for years was slipping through his fingers, and for the first time, he found himself truly accountable. As Nathan left the conference room, Sarah felt a profound sense of accomplishment. She knew that this confrontation was more than just a disciplinary measure, it was a statement of Redwood's commitment to change. Redwood Reset was no longer just an initiative, it was becoming a fundamental part of the company's identity. With Nathan's influence waning, Redwood Industries began to experience a period of unprecedented growth and innovation. Employees felt empowered to contribute their ideas, unburdened by the toxic hierarchies that had once held them back. Sarah's vision for a workplace built on respect and integrity was becoming a reality, and Redwood was finally on a path toward a brighter, more inclusive future. As Redwood Industries continued its transformation, Sarah's initiatives gained momentum, resonating with employees who had once felt overlooked and unheard. The Redwood Reset program had turned the company into a model of inclusivity and accountability, with employees actively participating in shaping the company's culture. Feedback sessions became routine, and the anonymous reporting system enabled staff to speak up without fear. What started as a cautious hope had grown into a full-fledged movement within the company, and Sarah's leadership was at the heart of it all. However, not everyone was ready to embrace these changes. While Nathan's influence had diminished after his confrontation with Sarah, he hadn't fully abandoned his resistance. Instead, he began to work even more covertly, stirring up discontent among the few remaining employees who shared his sentiments. He met with them in secret, fanning the flames of their dissatisfaction by framing Sarah's reforms as an outsider's agenda aimed at erasing Redwood's legacy. Nathan's resentment had transformed into something darker, and he was determined to see Sarah's efforts fail, even if it meant risking his own career. One day, Sarah received an anonymous tip from an employee who had overheard one of Nathan's clandestine meetings. According to the tip, Nathan and his allies were planning to undermine Redwood Reset by manipulating data and creating the appearance of financial inefficiencies. Their plan was to make it seem as though the new policies were draining company resources, hoping this would pressure the board into reversing Sarah's initiatives. The revelation unsettled Sarah, but she remained calm and focused. She knew that if Redwood was to become a truly inclusive workplace, she couldn't allow this kind of subversion to go unchecked. She immediately met with Linda and Redwood's Chief Financial Officer, Mark Kim, a respected veteran of the company who had supported Redwood Reset from the start. Together, they devised a plan to conduct a thorough audit of Redwood's financial and operational data, intending to expose any attempts to manipulate or distort the truth. Mark, a meticulous and highly respected figure, was instrumental in coordinating the audit. He approached the task with an unyielding commitment to transparency, reviewing every department's spending and resource allocation. Sarah and Linda worked alongside him, quietly gathering evidence and monitoring the actions of Nathan's faction. They kept their investigation discreet, knowing that if word leaked, it could jeopardize their efforts. As the audit progressed, discrepancies began to emerge. The financial records from Nathan's department showed unusual expenses, and vague budget allocations that lacked any clear justification. There were multiple instances of miscellaneous expenses that had no invoices or detailed descriptions attached. The data painted a picture of deliberate mismanagement, an attempt to sabotage Redwood's finances from within. The evidence was damning. Sarah, Linda, and Mark gathered their findings and prepared to present them to the executive board. They knew that confronting Nathan publicly would be a high-stakes move, but they also recognized that it was necessary. Redwood could no longer tolerate individuals who undermined the company's integrity for personal gain. Sarah resolved to stand her ground, determined to expose the truth and protect the culture she was building. On the day of the board meeting, the atmosphere at Redwood was tense. Word had spread that a significant announcement was coming, and employees speculated about what it could mean. Sarah arrived early, reviewing her notes and mentally preparing herself for what she knew would be a defining moment. Linda and Mark stood by her side, their expressions resolute and unwavering. As the board members took their seats, Sarah opened the meeting with a brief summary of Redwood Reset and the positive impact it had made on the company culture. She highlighted improvements in employee engagement, productivity, and morale, providing specific examples to illustrate how the initiative had transformed the workplace. The board listened intently, nodding in approval. Redwood's recent performance metrics reflected the success of Sarah's efforts, and the board members were clearly pleased with the direction the company was headed. Then, Sarah took a deep breath and shifted the focus to the audit findings. While Redwood Reset has brought about many positive changes, we've recently discovered actions that threaten to undermine everything we've achieved, she began, her tone firm but controlled. An internal audit, conducted by our CFO Mark Kim, has revealed discrepancies in the financial records of certain departments. These discrepancies point to deliberate attempts to create inefficiencies and distort the company's financial standing. The room fell silent as Sarah presented the evidence. She outlined the irregularities found in Nathan's department, detailing the unexplained expenses and the suspicious budget allocations. Mark corroborated her findings, providing additional context and emphasizing the meticulous nature of the audit. The board members exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of shock and anger. Finally, Sarah addressed the underlying cause of the discrepancies. It has come to our attention that these actions were not accidental. They were deliberate attempts to discredit Redwood Reset and create a false narrative of inefficiency. This kind of behavior is not only unethical, but it also goes against everything Redwood stands for. At this point, Nathan, who was present at the meeting as a senior manager, could no longer contain his frustration. He stood up abruptly, his face flushed with anger. "This is ridiculous," he exclaimed, his voice trembling with indignation. "You're trying to paint me as some kind of villain just because I've expressed concerns about your so-called reforms. Redwood has always been a place where people are free to speak their minds. This is a witch hunt, pure and simple." Sarah met his gaze calmly, unfazed by his outburst. "Nathan, this isn't about your opinion of Redwood Reset. This is about accountability. The evidence speaks for itself. These discrepancies weren't the result of honest mistakes or differing opinions. They were calculated actions intended to undermine our company's progress. Redwood deserves better than that." The board members looked at Nathan with a mixture of disappointment and disapproval. His defiance only served to deepen their suspicion, and the evidence was too substantial to ignore. One of the board members, a respected figure known for his no-nonsense approach, leaned forward and addressed Nathan directly. "Nathan, the actions we're discussing here go beyond personal grievances. You were entrusted with a position of leadership, and this is how you've chosen to use that responsibility, deliberately creating inefficiencies to sabotage company initiatives. That's unacceptable." Nathan's bravado began to falter as he realized the gravity of the situation. He glanced around the room, searching for allies, but found only cold, judgmental stares. His support within the company had dwindled, and the reality of his isolation was finally sinking in. Seeing that he had no way out, Nathan lowered his voice, attempting a different approach. "Look, maybe I went too far," he admitted, his tone subdued. "I didn't think it would come to this. I just felt that Redwood was losing something important, something that made us unique." Sarah didn't waver. Redwood's strength comes from its ability to adapt and grow. Clinging to outdated practices only holds us back. Our success isn't about resisting change, it's about embracing it in a way that respects everyone. Your actions put that at risk. The board, now fully convinced of Nathan's wrongdoing, made a swift decision. They announced that Nathan would be terminated effective immediately, and that Redwood would take steps to ensure that similar acts of sabotage would be impossible in the future. The decision was final and uncompromising, a clear signal that Redwood would not tolerate behavior that undermined the integrity of its mission. Nathan left the boardroom in silence, his head bowed as he walked past Sarah and the other executives. For years he had wielded his influence freely, confident that his connections and tenure would shield him from accountability. But today he had learned that Redwood was changing, and he was no longer part of its future. As the door closed behind Nathan, a sense of relief filled the room. Sarah could feel the tension dissipating, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. She turned back to the board, expressing her gratitude for their support and reaffirming her commitment to Redwood's values. With Nathan's dismissal, Redwood was finally free from the remnants of its toxic past. Sarah's leadership had not only transformed the company's culture but had also set a new standard for accountability. The Redwood Reset had become more than a program. It was now a defining aspect of the company's identity, a promise to every employee that Redwood was a place where respect, integrity, and inclusivity would always be upheld. As Sarah left the boardroom, she was greeted by Linda and Mark, who had been waiting outside. They shared a moment of quiet satisfaction, knowing that they had achieved something remarkable. Redwood Industries was now on a path that reflected the best of its values, a path that would lead to growth, resilience, and success for years to come. For Sarah, this victory was deeply personal. She had faced opposition, endured sabotage, and confronted deeply rooted resistance, yet she had remained steadfast in her mission. She had proven that integrity and respect were more than just ideals, they were powerful forces that could reshape an entire company. Redwood was now a place she could proudly call her own, and her work had left an indelible mark on its future. With a renewed sense of purpose, Sarah looked forward to the next chapter of Redwood Industries, confident that, together, they could build a legacy defined not by outdated traditions, but by a shared commitment to growth, unity, and the courage to embrace change. In the weeks following Nathan's departure, Redwood Industries settled into a new rhythm. The company felt lighter, as though a weight had been lifted. Employees who had once walked on eggshells around certain managers now felt comfortable sharing their ideas and concerns. The transformation brought a renewed energy to Redwood, with employees more engaged, collaborative, and dedicated than ever. The Redwood Reset program, now fully integrated, became a cornerstone of the company's culture. Sarah had succeeded not only in implementing policies but in fostering a genuine sense of community. Regular feedback sessions and team-building workshops became the norm, and employees were no longer hesitant to speak up. Every voice was valued, every contribution acknowledged. One afternoon, Linda approached Sarah with a proposal. She suggested a company-wide celebration to honor Redwood's journey over the past year and to acknowledge everyone's role in the cultural transformation. Sarah loved the idea. She felt it would be a meaningful way to recognize the team's efforts and to mark a fresh start for Redwood. The event was held in the atrium of Redwood's headquarters. The space was adorned with banners that read, "Redwood, respect, resilience, unity." Employees gathered, talking and laughing, their excitement filling the air. For many, it was the first time they'd experienced such a collective sense of pride and belonging at Redwood. Sarah took the stage, her face reflecting both gratitude and pride as she addressed the crowd. She began by thanking everyone for their commitment to Redwood's new direction, acknowledging the challenges they had overcome together. "When I first arrived here, I knew that Redwood had immense potential," she said, her voice warm and sincere. "But I also knew that to unlock that potential, we'd need to make some important changes. Change isn't easy, it requires courage, resilience, and a commitment to something greater than ourselves. And each of you has shown that courage. Together, we've built something truly special." She paused, letting her words settle before continuing. Redwood Reset was never just about policies or protocols. It was about creating a place where everyone is respected, where every voice matters. Redwood is no longer just a company, it's a community. And I'm so proud to be part of it with all of you. As Sarah spoke, she saw nods of agreement and smiles of appreciation. The applause that followed was warm and genuine, reflecting the pride they all felt. The Redwood of today was a place where people thrived not because of their connections or seniority, but because of their contributions and character. After the celebration, Sarah walked through the atrium, speaking with employees individually, listening to their stories, their dreams, and their ideas for Redwood's future. She heard from Clara, who shared how empowered she felt under the new leadership. Daniel, the mid-level analyst who had once been too afraid to speak up, told Sarah that he now felt Redwood was a place where he could truly grow. The conversations reaffirmed Sarah's purpose and commitment. Redwood wasn't just a job for her, it was a mission. Every story she heard, every handshake she shared, reinforced the impact of the Redwood Reset and the lasting change it had brought. As the evening wound down, Sarah returned to her office, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment. She reflected on the journey, from the challenges and resistance to the hard-won victories and the bonds she'd built along the way. Redwood was a different place now, and she knew that the values they had instilled would carry the company forward, even in her absence. But Sarah wasn't ready to step away yet. She had plans to continue building Redwood's legacy, to mentor new leaders who would carry on the work she had started. Her vision for the future included nurturing a generation of leaders who understood that respect and integrity weren't just words but guiding principles for a successful and ethical business. As she prepared to leave for the evening, Sarah looked around her office, feeling a quiet pride. She had not only fought for her own respect, but had built a culture of respect that would endure. Redwood was now a place where everyone felt they belonged, where fairness and integrity shaped every decision. The Redwood Reset had started as a single initiative, but it had grown into something far greater, a new way of working, a community of shared purpose, and a vision that would guide Redwood for years to come. And Sarah knew that as long as Redwood continued to stand by those values, its future would be bright, resilient, and united. With that thought, Sarah turned off her office light, ready to embrace the next chapter, knowing that she had truly made Redwood Industries a place where respect, unity, and integrity were more than aspirations, they were reality.